Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we're going to be building a kit that I have always wanted since I was a little kid, or as far back as I can remember. So the kit we're going to build today is the Mars liner from Atlantis Models. Now, for those of you that are in my age range, or even a little older, you might remember going to Disneyland as a kid and seeing something very similar to this spaceship out in Tomorrowland, I believe is where it was. And I remember as a kid going to Disneyland and seeing that rocket ship and just being totally amazed by it. And then, of course, I was incredibly disappointed when I found out you couldn't actually go in the rocket ship. You had to go to this little other place, and they go through a simulated spaceship ride to the moon and all that, which was fine, but as a kid, I just really wanted to get inside this thing and check it out. Now, I did purchase this kit online from an online seller, and believe it or not, this is how the kit came. The box is all jacked up. Wasn't able to get a refund or get a new kit in a newer box, and they're kind of getting hard to find, so I opened this one up already so I could make sure everything was okay and not broken, and so far it looks good, so I won't do my normal unsealing of the box, so to speak, but I'll definitely go through all the contents in the box and go over all the parts with you. So this kit was originally released way back in 1958 by a company called Revell Models. And I'll shoot up a picture of the box art here. I don't remember ever seeing this box art. However, back in 1959, they also released the kit, but in a different box. And I believe these are the ones that were sold at Disneyland. And again, I'll put a picture up here on the screen. This is the picture of the box I remember seeing as a kid. Unfortunately, I was never able to get one as a kid, so I'm glad that this company has re-released this one now so I can build it. The kit was again released back in 1996 by Atlantis Models. And I believe that this version of the kit came without any of the words for TWA or Fastway as this one is. It was just the red markings on the ship. Then finally, back in 2015, they re-released it again, but this time with a new set of decals. Now, on the original spaceship, it's a TWA branded spaceship, because back in the 70s and 60s and 70s, TWA was huge. It was a very well-known airline at the time, and they were, I believe they sponsored the actual spaceship and built it. Now, the original 22-foot tall rocket from Disneyland was eventually moved to the TWA headquarters building in Kansas City. It stayed there for a long time until the Disneyland contract ran out or something, and then it was purchased by a private company somewhere. They had it on display, and it deteriorated being out in the weather. And then at one point, someone purchased it again and refurbished it. And then after they refurbished it, it was on display at the Airline History Museum located in Kansas City, Missouri. Now that museum is no longer active, or it's closed anyways, so I'm not 100% sure where the actual rocket is now. So if you know where it's at, let me know down in the comments below, because someday I'd actually like to go visit the actual real one. I just think that would be cool. Alright, so now let's just go ahead and open the box and see what's inside. Alright, here we have the two halves of three. There's three parts that make up the main rocket body. We have some cutouts here and kind of a canopy for the pilots. And then there's also some little portholes here that'll have little clear parts in them. It's very smooth. There's no panel line detail at all. It's just very smooth and very basic. Here we have the bag of parts, which most of the parts were just loose running around the box when I got it. Here we have the parts to the three pods that come off the sides. Again, just smooth, nicely molded, but smooth. And there's probably going to be a lot of cleanup. I'm hopeful that the fit is good, but we shall see. Next we have an empty bag. Okay, here are the clear parts for the portholes. Okay, here we have the bottom of the rocket and the cone of the rocket, which is molded in one piece. Here we have another leg. Here we have some of the struts. Here we have one of the landing gear legs and some more strut pieces. I want to be careful, I don't want to lose these parts. Here we have the more struts and the last two landing feet. And, yep, there it is. And we have the canopy glass. It's just one clear part. Alright, let's put that back in the bag. Don't want to lose those. Next we have our instructions. And the instructions for the what's now called the Mars liner for licensing reasons, obviously. Looks like our first step is to be entering the clear parts into the fuselage, our landing legs, and putting it all together. Very straightforward, very basic assembly. I'm sure we're going to have some seams here to deal with, but that's okay. And here we have a picture and the placement of the decals. And as for the decals, pretty cool. They look pretty nice. Hopefully they are in good shape and they go on well. Now, interesting fact here, they've called it the Fastway Express. Obviously they can't use TWA for licensing, but if you look at how these decals are laid out, with some creative cutting, you can actually make this say TWA, and that's what we're going to do. Rocket liner, moonbeam, Mars liner, solar flare, and galactic comet are your options for what name you'll put on it. On the original spaceship, it was just called the Moonliner, but that's not an option. Maybe I'll see if I can get some decals made up and printed off that say that, or not. We'll just see how it goes. All right, and that is the contents of the kit. So, I'm going to take a walk down memory lane, clear off the bench, get some tools, some paint, and get to the build. For the first part of this build, we're going to be doing a lot of sanding. The parts are molded okay, but there is a reasonable amount of cleanup that needs to be done. These parts really don't have a positive placement point, so you just kind of have to lay them in their level and then glue them in. You want to let the glue just run in. This is Tamiya extra thin, so it does this very well. After you remove these parts from the sprue, there is a lot of excess material here on the end. You'll want to snip it off, but be careful not to cut off the alignment pin. For the three legs, I found that not all of the pieces fit as well to each other, so you'll want to test fit all of them until you get the ones that line up the best. You have to glue the clear pieces for the windows in from behind. You want to make sure you glue these in well because we're going to be doing a lot of sanding on the other side and we don't want them to pop out. The main body is in 3 pieces, and when you're assembling them, it can be very tricky. You're going to use some tape and a lot of patience. After the body's had time to dry, you're going to end up doing a lot more sanding. The seams for this are very prevalent and they will be seen, so you're going to want to sand down as much as you can. I'm using some perfect plastic putty, which is a water-based putty, to fill in the big gaps around the seams. This may not look pretty, but once I smooth it out with some water, it'll be a lot easier to sand and the seams will be completely filled in. After using some light gray primer, I can see some areas that need some more attention. I'm going to clean those up now. Now I'm giving everything a coat of metal colored primer. The primer came out pretty good, but it felt a little rough, so I'm using a fine grit sanding sponge to just smooth everything out. Where these struts mount onto the main fuselage, the ends kind of poke up a little bit. I'm going to sand these down so they look flush. Now I'm adding a base coat of Tamiya Gloss White. Unfortunately, the decals supplied with this kit are not very good. They kept wanting to rip and tear. They almost seemed like they were very old decals. Now it's time to trim up the Fastway decal so that I can make it say TWA. Fortunately, Tamiya Red matches the decal color very well, so I'm using that to touch up areas where the decal has ripped and the undercoat is showing through. And here it is, the completed TWA moon rocket from Disneyland. Well, sorta. This is the Glendale's version of the Mars liner, the Fastway Express, which, as you can see by the decals, if you cut them out, you can still make them say TWA. So that is what I did. This is now the TWA Express. So once again, this is an older kit that's been repopped many times, and this version does kind of show its age. This is not a kit for a beginner. This one took a little finagling to get together. However, once it did go together, everything else went pretty good. The seam lines are manageable. The parts do fit well as far as the landing pods and the struts, and also the clear parts. However, I think this kit's major drawback for me was the decals. The quality of the decals was not good at all. They actually felt a lot like some vintage decals that I've tried to use in the past, where they just want to come apart. I was able to repair the decals, and then I was able to match some Tamiya red, matches pretty well, to fix up and clean up the decals where they had ripped and were showing white through. If I were to build one of these again in the future, I would most definitely mask off the striped areas and just paint them with masking, and then just use the decals for the TWA and the doorway and the TWA Express. All of the red striping decals I would have done by hand. Even this kind of complicated one around the nose, I would have masked that off and spray painted a base red and then overdone white over the top of that to make it look a little better. But for what it is, this kit still looks good. I'd say it's not a perfect kit, not even by any stretch, but it looks good. It was fun to build. Like I said, I've always wanted to build one of these. I've always been a fan of the actual rocket ship that was in Disneyland. And I think there may be a smaller version of this in Disneyland now, but I'm not 100% sure. So if you know, let me know in the comments. And I would still like to locate the original 70+ foot tall one and go see it sometime if it ever is on display again. So if you know where it is or have an idea where it's being displayed, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, so that's going to wrap up this episode of the TWA Express from Glendale Models. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. It helps out the channel. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button down below and ring the bell so that you get notified every time I upload new content. Be sure to check all my links in the description below as well. And if you have any questions on this kit or any of my other mini kits that I've built, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. So with that said, until next time, friends, be safe out there and go build something.